to this brief discussion of the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. And let us begin today with Nietzsche's story about the madman. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, "I seek God, I seek God." As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. "Why, did he get lost?" said one. "Did he lose his way like a child?" said another. "Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage or emigrated?" Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his glance. "Whither is God?" he cried. "I shall tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers." "But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns. Are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, comfort ourselves? Is not this the greatest deed, too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods, simply to seem worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever will be born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will be part of a higher history than all histories hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke and went out. "I come too early," he said then. "My time has not come yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of man. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds require time even after they are done, before they can be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves." It has been related further that on the same day the madman entered diverse churches and there sang his Requiem Aeternam Deo. Let out and called to account, he is said to have replied each time, "What are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" This dramatization from Nietzsche's The Gay Science is part of the prophetic vision that Nietzsche sees. The coming destruction of the fundamental structure of values upon which Western civilization has been built. Right? How does that come about? There are many dimensions of it: industrialization, capitalism, globalization, scientific development, but increasingly the very bottom of our belief system is being sucked out. Nietzsche foresees that, but he sees that people do not yet know what is yet happening to them. They no longer believe with the way they used to believe, but they cling to it out of desperation. But as that realization comes forth to fruition, it will bring forth cataclysmic transformations of the society of Western civilization and culture. Will we be up to it? Will we be able to take on the conditions of a post-Christian world? Nietzsche writes the following: The title of this section, also from the Gay Science, by the way, the word gay has transformed its meaning over the last 100 years. This is Fröhliche Wissenschaft in German, which is now currently translated often as the joyful wisdom, so as not to leave any confusions about sexual orientation. But the original translation was the Gay Science. The title of a section called The Background of Our Cheerfulness. What is cheerful about this for Nietzsche? And he writes, the greatest recent event, that God is dead, that the belief in the Christian God has ceased to be believable, is even now, 1887, beginning to cast its first shadows over Europe. The event itself is much too great, too distant, too far from the comprehension of the many, even for the tidings of it to be thought of as having arrived yet. Not to speak of the notion that many people might know what has really happened here and what must collapse now that this belief has been undermined. All that was built upon it, leaned on it, grew into it. For example, our whole European morality. And he further comments, since I have the passage I want. When one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. This morality is by no means self-evident. Christianity is a system, a whole view of things thought out together. By breaking one main concept out of it, the faith in God, one breaks the whole. Nothing necessarily remains in one's hands. Christianity presupposes that man does not know, cannot know what is good for him, what is evil. He believes in God who alone knows it. Christian morality is a command. We know the 10 Commandments. Its origin is transcendent. It is beyond all criticism, all right to criticism. It has truth only if God is the truth. It stands and falls with faith in God. Nietzsche is a prophet who thinks he sees at the root and core of our civilization a disintegration, and that our civilization believes it can continue to exist and carry out the morality as the basis for the belief system disintegrates. But he's clear also, people do not yet realize what is happening. Right? And in fact, they will, the more and more their belief system gets challenged, the more and more they will cling to it and insert it and seek to impose it. So we're confronting cataclysmic situation emerging, Nietzsche foresees. And the question is, will we as a culture, as a civilization, be able to take in, understand what has taken place, and find a way to recreate a civilization that is not dependent upon a no longer believable system, belief system? Or will we insist on imposing it to the extent of self-destruction? That is the framework of really almost everything that Nietzsche undertakes. He sees himself as a prophet. He sees himself as one who sees behind the appearance and understands the depth psychological motivations which drive individuals. In fact, you can think of Nietzsche here, he likes to present himself as one who sees people's worldviews as expressions of the conditions under which human beings can thrive. So the worldview, the metaphysics, the philosophy of the great philosophers, but also of cultures and civilizations, right, are expressions of the conditions of the morality which meets the needs of the psychology of the individuals. The psychology, that means the fundamental psychological drives and needs that individuals have, right? Different individuals having different psychological drives and needs, gives expression to different conditions under which they thrive, right? And those conditions under which they thrive are the basis then for the theories they develop. So as a philosopher, you could take this as a critique, a critical analysis of every past philosopher, all right? All right, and to take their philosophy and diagnose it like a psychotherapist. Well, what is that philosophy? All right, what is that philosophy? What kind of life is that philosophy celebrating? What are the moral conditions that it is celebrating? Right, and what is it avoiding, as it were? And the description of those moral conditions then really is an expression of the conditions under which that philosopher, you think of the philosopher per se, right, under which that philosopher's would thrive, what his psychological, his, almost in all cases, it'd be almost always males, the psychological conditions under which he would thrive, right? An example would be, take the Stoics, develop a vision of a natural, organized world, harmonious world, operating in accordance with law and with rationality, with a logos, right? As an expression of an ordered world, which the Stoics at that time needed in order to feel at home, at one, in a world that was disintegrating around them. So it's a psychological diagnosis of philosophy, but it is also, in a more fundamental sense, a more comprehensive sense, a psychological diagnosis of a culture and a civilization. And the culture and civilization of ours is really Christian civilization, Judeo-Christian civilization. You can add Islam into that also, because it's all part of the same mix. Right? And what is that? What is that psychological founding of that civilization? That leads one. That's the basis into which Nietzsche develops his genealogy of morals, the book Beyond Good and Evil, the genealogy of morals. Genealogy for Nietzsche is a strategy for diagnosing the psychodynamics of individuals and really of cultures. And most central for him always is Western culture and civilization. Right? He sees Western culture and civilization to embody, right, the Christian morality, which, in a very simple sense, is Platonism for the populace. Right. So Platonism is the theoretical framework. Christianity is simply Platonism for the masses, really. Right. And what is Platonism for the masses, and what is Christianity? Right. Right. It is, and here is the center of the Nietzschean analysis. Really, it is the result of the revenge of the impotent. So let us go back to understanding what Nietzsche is saying. What is fundamentally wrong with the values of Western civilization? Right? And the background of his cheerfulness is because the disintegration of the belief in God opens the possibility for human beings really retaking control of their life and its possibilities. Right? Retaking control from Christianity. Christianity is the expression of the revenge of the impotent. What does that mean? What is he saying? How can that be? Right? Well, in the simplest sense, let me begin. Just contrast in your mind the Homeric, the heroes of Homer, right, of the Iliad and the Odyssey, right, with the Christian saint, right? So you have heroes and saints. You would have no saints in the Homeric world, and you really don't have any heroes in the Christian world, right? The saint replaces the hero. What is that dynamic? All right. Well, what Nietzsche says is that what is celebrated in the Homeric world, right, is the vitality of life, the vitality of of natural existence. Right? The central characteristic qualities or values in the Homeric world is good and bad. Good is what the heroes embody. Achilles, Agamemnon, Odysseus, right? They have natural vitality, a celebration of this life, right? Right. But it is obviously one which shows fantastic respect among other heroes, but of course shows no respect for the plebeians, who, when captured, can be destroyed. Right? But it is what he would call a master morality, but it's a morality which is a morality of this world. It's a morality of the natural world. It's a morality which celebrates this life, and you can see that in a sense by the remarkable expression of what is the afterlife in the Homeric world. The afterlife is not something one looks forward to. It is not. The two things it doesn't have, which the Christian world has, is a celebration of how divine, how beautiful it will be after you die, and it does not have a hell which takes tremendous pleasure from the suffering of the others. Right? We come back to that in a moment. What does it mean to have a religion, right, which celebrates the painful, eternal suffering of those who we despise? What kind of being takes satisfaction with? What kind of God takes satisfaction from the eternal suffering of those who have who do not ascribe to its values? Come back to that in a moment, because it's really quite relevant to Nietzsche, to his understanding of our civilization and culture, and I think it may well have tremendous relevance to our politics today, but that's an aside. The jury can disregard that comment. So that's the one side, right? But what is the afterlife for the ancient for Achilles? The famous remark in Homer, right? Achilles says it is better to be a slave in the world of the living than a king among the dead. I don't have the exact words of the Homeric quote, but it's brilliant to think of that, right? There is a celebration of life, of the physical vitality of this world, right? And what happens with Christianity, right? Quite the reverse, right? Now, what is the dynamic that Nietzsche sees there? He sees a profound difference between two different kinds of moralities. Right? What he calls a master morality and a slave morality, right? And the master morality is one which celebrates the conditions of natural life, right? And what is the slave morality? The slave morality is the morality that comes forth from those who have been despised by the master morality. It is a morality of revenge. It is a morality which it's a transformation of values, right? Which is born of resentment, right? Ressentiment is the fundamental affirmation of the slave in slave morality is the no to the master morality. It is a no born of resentment, right? which seeks to transform the values and make the values of celebration of this life as the embodiment, sexual drives, physical drives, vitality and energy as evil, and replaces them with the values of humility. Right? You don't find humility among the list of virtues of Aristotle. Right? Humility, chastity, self-denial, numerous forms of self-denial. The natural world is denied in its vitality, and what replaces it? The supernatural world, the transcendent, right? The spiritual, heaven, God, the soul, spirituality, immortality. And that is offered to whom? That is offered to the meek who shall inherit the earth. Right? So that is the creation of a non-existent world to which this world is sacrificed. Because what has happened is you've created a supernatural. What is the supernatural? It's a fabrication of the imagination of those who can't live and strive and survive and celebrate this world. Right? That's what Nietzsche's sense of that is. There has been a slave revolt in morality, transforming the moral framework of Western civilization and culture. And he's got a fascinating discussion of how he sees that happening. Let me see if I can provide a little bit of the dynamic of the development of Christianity, because it's got a brilliant analysis of the way in which the failure of this life has given birth to aspirations to another life, which will recompense us for what we have lost here, right? But in so doing, it has created a systematically self-denying world of the natural world. For Nietzsche, the real challenge that our civilization faces, as we come to realize that there is no transcendent, that's what the death of God means, that this natural world is this earth, this life, this body on this earth is all there is, and the rest is a fabrication. Right? Well, as we come to realize that, we're torn by the sense of, does that mean everything is meaningless? The challenge of nihilism is central for Nietzsche. What is the conditions under which human life can be meaningful and significant? Right? It has gotten in its meaning and its significance from its belief in the supernatural, in the transcendent, by self-denial. Right? That is increasingly not going to be viable for reasons that we could go into in great detail, but that's what the madman sees. He sees that that death of God is now beginning to seep into the consciousness of Western civilization. It will not happen quickly. It will take time. As it takes time, it will systematically undermine the systems and beliefs and attitudes of the institutions of the society, right? But to the extent to which people devote their meaning of their life to that belief system, the value of their life is being pulled out from under them. That is destructive. People respond to such destruction in all kinds of violent ways, refusing to accept it and insisting on imposing it, and the transformations will be cataclysmic, he's convinced. Right? But the possibility is that one will be able to recapture the capacity of making our own life, the one life that really does exist for us on this earth, on this planet, in this universe, for which there is no transcendent meaning or significance. There is no supernatural. Right? There is no afterlife. That's the reality. Nietzsche doesn't argue that point, by the way. I mean, it's not like he's trying to prove that there's no, I mean, he thinks it's obvious. And that's not the point. The point is that what happens when people begin, when the obvious truth begins to seep into the culture and to the psyche of the civilization, which is happening already. And it was beginning in the 19th century. Clearly, you can see it actually beginning in the 18th century, the development of this consciousness with the scientific revolution and the development of industrialization. We won't, Nietzsche, it doesn't really get, Nietzsche is not really a sociological analyst. Right? He's a psychological analyst who thinks that he sees behind the surface of the human psyche and the cultural psyche. So what you have then is a civilization that is built on a lie, right? The lie of the supernatural, that our life will be redeemed hereafter, right? A lie, the bottom of which is falling out, right? And for those who depend on that lie, nihilism is the answer. So nihilism is in some sense the problem for Nietzsche. Nihilism is the belief in nothing. Well, if your life is built around the transcendent, the supernatural, the eternal life, immortality of the soul, right? And that is shown to be empty, meaningless, worthless, then your life is meaningless, empty, worthless. But if you can build your life, if you can find a way to celebrate this world, or the language of the Zarathustra is being faithful to the earth. If you can find a way to find this life valuable and meaningful on its own terms, right? That's the background of his cheerfulness, right? That this possibility opens up for a civilization and a culture, but it will require a whole different worldview. It will require a whole different morality. It will require a whole different psychology. It will require being faithful to the earth, to the possibilities of making life meaningful on this earth without transcendent significance. Do we have the capacity for that? Do we have the strength for that? It's always the challenge of Nietzsche. So nihilism is the challenge, but there's a twist to it, because it's usually thought that the destruction of the Christian worldview, right, means that nothing has any meaning, so that nihilism is the consequence in the popular consciousness or the traditional consciousness. Nihilism, the meaninglessness of everything, is the consequence of the destruction of the supernatural world. But from Nietzsche's point of view, the creation of the supernatural world and placing all one's values in that, in the soul, in immortality, in the afterlife, that is nihilism, because that is the extraction and the demoralization of this world and this life, which is the only one that's real. So Nietzsche, so that nihilism is really the root of Judeo-Christianity. It is a Judeo-Christianity is embodied idealized nihilism at work, and it has destroyed, or well, destroyed is not the right word. It has undermined the natural possibilities of human beings in this world. And numerous expressions of that can be seen in who one celebrates. I mean, look at the saints of the Christian tradition, for example, as embodiments of embodied nihilism. They are scrawny creatures who have been self-denied, like Teresa Avila, for example, or Hildegard Bingham, or just think of the saints. They're people who are celebrated by their self-denial. as opposed to the people who are celebrated. The example we use is the Homeric heroes. Not that they are Nietzsche's ideal. I want to talk about that later on, because what is the ideal? Well, the ideal is what is historically known as the overman, sometimes referred to as the Superman, but it's a poor translation. Nietzsche, Zarathustra comes, and what has Zarathustra says? As he says, when Zarathustra comes, he says, all right, beginning. All right, this is from the beginning of Zarathustra. Thus spake Zarathustra, which is often considered to be one of the highlights of German literature. I can't read German, but I'm told that the three greatest expressions of German literature are Luther's Bible, Goethe's Faust, and Nietzsche's Thus Spake Zarathustra. It is a remarkable parable of this new world, of this prophet coming down from the mountain and speaking the new world that is possible. Right. The world of the madman. But when Zarathustra was alone, he spoke thus to his heart. Could it be possible? This old saint in the forest has not yet heard anything of this, that God is dead. When Zarathustra came into the next town, which lies on the edge of the forest, he found many people gathered in the marketplace, for it had been promised that there would be a tightrope walker. Nietzsche's use of these expressions, we could get carried away and could spend a lot of time talking about the irony with which he writes and the imagery that he uses and the way he plays with that. And that, of course, leads to a lot of misunderstandings. And I want to come back to that in a moment. All right. But what is the tightrope walker? What is he doing? He's walking from the human condition, sick as it is, sickened by Christianity, by this self-denial, which is the celebration of the supernatural. And what does he says? And Zarathustra spoke thus to the people. I teach you the overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? I don't want to go on. It's really brilliant to a little more. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. I beseech you, my brothers, remain faithful to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. Poison mixers are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying and poisoned themselves, of whom the earth is weary, so let them go. Once the sin against God was the greatest sin, but God died, and these sinners died with him. To sin against the earth is now the most dreadful thing, and to esteem the entrails of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth. It goes on, I will dwell upon it here. But that's the overman, which has often been parodied, and I want to come back to it in a moment, it's relevant here, it's not a Superman, it's not a violent, destructive person. It is the human being who remains faithful to the earth and celebrates our natural conditions as individuals and as a culture, and celebrates and creates the possibilities that natural life affords us. I mean, one example that he offers at one point, to give you an example of what Nietzsche has in mind, of a kind of person who is a tightrope walker, pushing the possibilities of natural existence is Goethe. He uses Goethe as an example. Let me take a little parenthesis here and say something about what about Nietzsche's life itself and what happened to his thought and how it got associated with and exactly appropriated by the Nazis, and what took place there and why that happened. Nietzsche himself was born in 1844, right? Dies in 1900, right? But actually goes insane in the beginning of 1889. The reasons for his insanity are not fully clear, but it is generally believed that it was the result of a degeneration, a physical degeneration caused by syphilis, contracted early on in his early adulthood. He may have gone to a brothel once or twice, and the thought is that he contracted syphilis. There's no, it's not clear at that case. There are other possibilities, including one thought from an analysis possibly as a tumor in the brain. But it is clear that his health was degrading throughout his entire life. He became the youngest professor in a Swiss university at the age of 24 in philology, right? And taught there for 10 years, from 1869 to 1879, until he had to resign because of health. And it was just really from 1879, basically, till 1889, just the very beginning of it, a 10-year period, and almost all of his writings were created. In fact, in the last year of his life, suffering fantastic all forms of physical and physical pain and suffering. Stefan Zweig has a brilliant, sensitive description of the physical conditions under which Nietzsche suffered throughout much of his life, and certainly over the last few years, which made it almost impossible for him to get a significant period of time straight to do any work. At the same time, with all that happening, with his physical health continuing to deteriorate, in the last year of his life, he produced 4 major works. It's kind of astounding to think of it. But I don't want to dwell upon that at the moment. What happened is that when he totally collapsed, he was taken over into the care of his sister. The sister was an anti-Semite, and she married one of the foremost Nazis in the late 19th century. She took Nietzsche's work, writing, and Nietzsche. She set him up in her house, created a kind of spectacle where people could come and see this man who was incapable, after a couple of years, incapable of uttering a coherent sentence, and then total destruction of the operating of the brain. But she had him as a kind of spectacle that people come and view. Kind of pathetic. You can see pictures of him if you go on the internet. At the same time as she had all of his papers, and she put them together, selected by herself, and produced a book called The Will to Power. Right? That book is a, it's a, Nietzsche had a lot of notes that he had written that he said should be destroyed when he died. These were selectively organized by her to produce The Will to Power, which is really a proto-Nazi Nietzsche, which has none of the irony and sarcasm which runs throughout Nietzsche. You have to really read him carefully, because you could take passages out and give them a very totally different meaning, right? But she did that, and she thought very much to present Nietzsche as the philosopher of National Socialism. That was her effort. She was very pleased to have met Adolf Hitler, to have welcomed him to the Nietzsche archives in the mid-30s before she died. So that was a kind of fabricated history, and the Nazis embraced that and promoted that interpretation of Nietzsche. And for the first 50 years of the 20th century, that was the way Nietzsche was seen by the public at large, right? Until scholars sort of dug back through the actual writings of Nietzsche and how the book Will to Power was created. That notion is a Nietzschean notion, but it has a very different meaning than the way in which it comes forth. Right? So the reason why Nietzsche is associated with National Socialism is because of the promotion of his sister, because of the embrace and use to which the Nazis put it, and because of the way Nietzsche writes, which allows his work to be picked and chosen. He writes with an irony and a sarcasm that can easily be misunderstood. In fact, he himself says that he writes for a future generation. We can hold him responsible for some of the misinterpretations. We can argue certainly legitimately with the values that he promotes, but it's important to understand why that happened. In an American context, he was recaptured, as it were, for the popular audience by the work of Walter Kaufmann. And Walter Kaufmann put together the Portable Nietzsche. You can get a hold of that, and did a biography of Nietzsche. And now, since basically 1950s in the Western world, there's a total reevaluation and appreciation of who he was, what he had written, and there's scholarly discussions as to what attention one should pay to the scattered notes that were left over, as opposed to the works which he actually published. I'm really focusing on the works that he actually published. All right. So that I want to just put that in the context, understand where Nietzsche comes from. But he is a critic of Christian civilization, and he sees Christian civilization as the revenge of those who are incapable of facing life on its own terms and celebrating it. Now, I had to read about a little quote here. Here's Nietzsche. The slave revolt in morals begins when ressentiment, he likes to use that French word because it captures in a more comprehensive fashion, a kind of pervasive sense of not more than resentment, but a sense really that of anger and hatred, really directed at those who are seen as insulting and looking down upon and devaluing one. The slave revolt in morals begins when ressentiment becomes creative and ordains values. The ressentiment of creatures to whom the real reaction, that of the deed, is denied, and who find compensation in an imaginary revenge. Imaginary revenge, for example, is how people will suffer in hell for what they have done. That's an imaginary revenge. And one who's motivated by ressentiment is one who enjoys torture. The torture is really the way you give expression to the sense that you have been devalued, that you've been insulted, you've been not only not respected, you have been reduced to insignificance. Right? So you can do torture in this life, or you can celebrate the torture of those in the afterlife for eternity. Right? While all noble morality, this is again from Nietzsche, grows from a triumphant affirmation of itself. That's Nietzsche's sense of this. Slave morality from the outset says no to an outsider, to another, to a non-self. And this no is its creative act. It's important to reflect upon that. The creative act of the noble morality is the affirmation of life. As, for example, again, using the Homeric heroes as an example. They're a limited example for reasons I want to come back to, but they are much better to understand because they are celebratory of this world, as opposed to the morality of, well, we'll come to St. Paul. From Nietzsche's point of view, the last Christian died on the cross, and Christianity is really the religion of Paul. Come back to that. Those are famous Nietzschean analysis there. The reversal of the evaluating gaze, this necessary orientation outwards rather than inwards to the self, belongs characteristically to ressentiment. In order to exist at all, slave morality from the outset always needs an opposing outer world. Its action is fundamentally reaction. So the slave says basically no. And to whom does the slave say no? Why, to the masters, of course. And again, this is an oversimplification of a dramatic situation, but what he's trying to emphasize here, right? If you think about it in an analytic way, right? What are the conditions under which a human being thrives? Well, people have different psychological capacities, different psychological strengths and weaknesses, different psychological needs and possibilities. And Nietzsche, somewhat oversimplifying, sees really this conflict between those who thrive in and through the celebration of the body in its natural relations to the world, right? And those who have been and feel themselves to have been defeated by life in different ways, who feel themselves to be incapable of sustaining and creating meaning themselves, and feel that they have been the victims. So the sense of victimization and the identification with it is central, right? That's why, again, from Nietzsche's point of view, that's why you have a religion which celebrates a God on the cross, right? That's a very strange image to be celebratory of a religion, right? So we have there's a psychological analysis, right? And by the way, Nietzsche applies that, and we can take it from, I'm not going to do it here, but one can do that kind of analysis for every philosopher and for every culture. And for example, Nietzsche does a fascinating analysis to what are the values that are really embodied in Buddhism, for example. Right? And they're clearly values which express a sense that life is suffering, right? That this natural world is too much. They are the values of withdrawal from engagement and from self-affirmation. Right? It's done in a peaceful way. Buddhism is quite different from Christianity. It doesn't celebrate the torture of others. Very different sense. It's much more at peace with its withdrawal, with its self-denial. So there's no hell there. Right? There's no celebration in the torture of the nobles, as it were. Right? So there's a fascinating dynamic here, and it's interesting from the philosophical point of view, which we won't dwell upon here, to look at philosophers from a Nietzsche's psychoanalytic point of view and say, what is the philosophy of David Hume or Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine or Plato, which becomes obviously quite relevant here, or Aristotle or the Stoics or the Epicureans? What is the philosophy? That philosophy is an expression, says Nietzsche, this is his diagnostic way, that philosophy is an expression of a style of life that those people are celebrating, the individuals are celebrating, and they're celebrating it because it is that which speaks to their psychological depth, psychological needs, the conditions under which their kind of character thrives. So you can do that kind of analysis, fascinatingly. You can, to every philosopher, you can do it to every theoretician, you can do it to Nietzsche himself, by the way, totally appropriate, right? But it is profoundly insightful. Is it always right? I mean, is it a complete solution? No. Nietzsche himself doesn't offer any systematic, comprehensive philosophy. All right, again, I'll say more about that in a while too. It is a perspective, right? And for Nietzsche, everything we do is a perspective on the world. So, all right, some perspectives are ennobling, they are invigorating, they are encourage the creation of opportunities, originality, efforts, new starts, creative transformations of the situation, trying essays in the world in the sense that you try something. A celebratory life tries things, engages things, takes risks, lives dangerously, another expression in Nietzsche's terms, right? And then there are those who are the reverse, right? And we can take, if you don't take this as a comprehensive analysis of every of an individual, you can see these thematics at work, and it's quite illuminating in many ways. It's very illuminating about all the great philosophers in Western civilization. It's quite illuminating about Buddha, Confucius, all the great religious teachers, for example. What are the conditions? What are they? What are the values? What is the lifestyle they're celebrating? And to what psychological needs and character does such a lifestyle speak? Right. So it's diagnostic, right? And Nietzsche's discussions of a genealogy as a strategy of inquiry is a consequence of his naturalism, right? The naturalism is the sense he is a late 19th century thinker who was profoundly influenced by the scientific revolution, by Darwin, by the development of Darwin and the theory of evolution, and the genealogy, which is a mode of analysis that he engages in, is looking back to the roots which gave birth to either an individual character or give birth to a culture. And his major concern always is Western culture of Western civilization. How did we get here? Right? So you do the genealogy of morals, going beyond good and evil, right? Going back to the roots, the psychodynamic roots, which gave rise to the moral framework which has sustained and developed, within which Western civilization has developed, right? And then to see that moral framework presupposes gives birth to a way of thinking of the world in terms of the supernatural, which is an expression of this self-denial, which is no longer viable, right? So I give you a theory, a diagnostic theory. The genealogy is somewhat comparable, by the way, at the same time, and had influence on Freud, right? Freud is looking to the depth psychological dynamics of conscious human experience and behavior, and then applies it to culture, right? Not uninfluenced by Nietzsche, who was really the first one in Western civilization to really explore in some detail the so-called unconscious. Right? He doesn't use that phrase, but that's what he's talking about. All right, going back to the psychic roots of our belief systems and our institutions. So the genealogy is that looking at, from a naturalistic point of view, diagnostically, how we got where we are. All right. And then, but he's not simply seeking to be diagnostic. The point of the diagnosis is to lead to a transformation, to point one in the direction of a healthier way of proceeding, right? So that is, so under what conditions, and this is the central theme that runs through all of Nietzsche, under what conditions can human life be experienced as meaningful once we realize and come to terms with the fact that there is no transcendent meaning to our lives, that we are corporeal beings on this planet in a universe which does not care for us? Can we take that seriously? Can we accept that? And can we, in the face of that, find a way to make our life meaningful and significant? That's the fundamental theme throughout all of Nietzsche. Right? It's nihilism, and with the two sides of it, as I said. Side one is seeing nihilism emerging from the disintegration of supernatural belief systems. Christianity is the key, but all supernatural belief systems are all fabrications. Right? So if your life is built around a supernatural belief system, it's built on a fabrication, right? And when that supernatural belief system disintegrates, as it is doing over the next few centuries from Nietzsche's point of view, right? Clearly, the first result is nihilism, meaning everything, the meaning is extracted from our life. But the other side is, but that was nihilism itself, to put the meaning of life into this in the supernatural, which is empty, which is a fabrication, which doesn't exist. So the entire framework has been nihilistic, based on self-denial. That's why we celebrate, Christians celebrate saints, for example, as opposed to celebrating heroes. Right? Well, then the challenge becomes for individuals. That's what he means by the background of our cheerfulness, right? Is that we see that the world is opened up. We are no longer constrained. I mean, we being, the word he uses is we free spirits. You'll see that throughout Nietzsche's writings. We free spirits. Those are people who have come to the realization that we're not entrapped by this 10 commandments, by this supernatural set of requirements, which are total fabrications, which have no basis in reality or in morality, but are simply expressions of the resentment of those who could not live on their own terms and celebrate this life. Right? And we free spirits now see that the horizon is opened up. But have we the strength to face that situation, to confront it, and to creatively engage in the world? and make something meaningful, since it's not going to be made for us. We can't look outside for it. That was a fabrication. We have to look within, individually and within the dynamics of our culture, to find the way to creative self-affirmation. So when Zarathustra teaches the overman, what he's teaching is, all right, Nietzsche, again, loves to play with these words, and it's important to see that play. The overman, all right, is one who takes over and who, for whom man must go under. Man, as he historically, human beings in this context, let's widen the framework of the language here. The traditional human being, the human being that is a product of the self-denying civilization, must go under so that the overman, which is that human being who takes over with full appreciation of our natural condition, and then explores and develops to the best of possibilities human capacities. Now, Nietzsche is not a Democrat. Nietzsche is not an egalitarian. Right? Nietzsche says egalitarianism is simply the value of the herd. It's reducing everybody to the common lower level. It is part of the slave morality. It's the rebellion of the slaves, right, who are resentful of those who excel. And they seek to bring, because the others, if some excel, then the rest of us are, what are we left? We are in the shadows. We are in the shade. We are left by the wayside. Right? Slave morality seeks to bring down that capacity to excel. By the way, that was also a profound concern of de Tocqueville in his book on democracy in America, that the emergence of democracy in America, and democracy in the modern world, of which America is in the forefront of that in the 1830s, a process that de Tocqueville sees happening, of course, is part of the whole new modern world, is concerned that the fundamental dynamic of this emerging new world, which America is in the lead of, is promoting the value of equality. And he's concerned that promoting of the value of equality is going to create a moral pressure against those who can potentially excel, because by so doing, they stand out. So Nietzsche is in the same thematic here. It's a different perspective than de Tocqueville. But Nietzsche sees democracy, and socialism for that matter, as the politics of Christianity, the politics of the leveling in which the herd morality dominates at the expense of the capacity to excel. That may not make people happy or something, and maybe a good reason for, maybe the basis for interesting criticisms. And the challenge, I guess, for some might be to figure out, well, can one have, mutual respect for all people, and still accept the naturalistic vision which pervades Nietzsche's thought? That's an open question, I think. We could explore that. But the herd morality, from Nietzsche's point of view, is the morality of the masses. Right? I guess in one sense, it's the values of commercial television in the United States as an example of what Nietzsche had in mind. So That's the challenge. And so the conception of the overman, which is with which he's, universally associated, uh, is the vision of what human beings can become when they own their natural condition and celebrate its capacities. But Nietzsche does not believe that people are all equal or have equal capacities. So, in fact, he thinks only some, a relatively small number, will really make significant use of this. The benefit for the majority is they will be able to see the kind of creativity that is possible. They'll be able to enjoy the demonstrations and the experience and the embodiment of that kind of creativity. Even though the vast majority of people he doesn't think would have the capacity to do it on their own. He's not an egalitarian, and that's clear, no matter how one reads it. He's also not a politician. He has really no particular interest in politics. His concerns are with culture, but not with politics. So there's really no discussion of politics in all of Nietzsche's writings, except whatever uses the Nazis made of him. And he had he had nothing but contempt for German nationalism, for example. At one point, he says, all anti-Semites should be shot. So, I mean, in his own sense of values, I mean, he had nothing but contempt for anti-Semites. Couldn't stand the person that his sister married. Didn't particularly like her views either. He was so disgusted with German nationalism that he left Germany, took up Swiss citizenship, never went back to Germany. Lived the rest of his last 10 years so more of his life in between Switzerland and Italy, but would not go back to Germany. So just as an aside, in terms of any identification with the Nazism and German nationalism, he didn't have any respect for nationalism at all, in fact. But his concerns are with psychology and with culture, with character. So the overman is the vision, and human beings now are, as it were, a bridge between ape and overman. Human beings are not the ultimate end of creation. They are not the result, that which evolution has been aiming for, right? They are at best a tightrope over across an abyss, as he says. Another example he talks about, a tightrope across an abyss. A tightrope between beast, ape, and overman. But can we move to that? Are we capable of it? Are any of us capable? Is a civilization going to make that possible? So what are the conditions then of making life meaningful? And under what conditions could this life be made meaningful? And ultimately, I think, and I'm sort of oversimplifying a complicated story here, for Nietzsche, the solutions really to making life meaningful in a sense are really aesthetic. Not aesthetic in the sense that it is up to us to make our life intrinsically significant on its own terms. And here is the significance of the famous notion that Nietzsche develops of the eternal recurrence. Right? Let me oh, I know what it is. I wanted to read this thing here. Yeah. In the Gay Science, Nietzsche devises a test for the meaning of our life. Right? As we have seen, an overman says yes to his life. An overman turns his back on spite and revenge, and all no saying. An overman remains faithful to the earth. But how could one tell whether one has done that? Self-deception is such a common characteristic. Perhaps one is kidding oneself. Nietzsche devises a test. What if someday or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live it once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you. All in the same moonlight between the trees, and even this moment, and I myself, the eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, you are God, and never have I heard anything more divine? If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question each and everything, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your action as the greatest weight? Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life, to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal? The eternal recurrence sometimes is taken, the question, did Nietzsche really believe that everything would return and reproduce itself? And you think, well, in one abstract sense, if nature is eternal, I mean, eternal, it's a big time. If nature's eternal, one might speculate in some strange of an eternity of time that everything could recapitulate itself just as it has, right? So there are some who think that Nietzsche believed in the eternal recurrence as a possible or real historical scientific truth about an eternal world. The world is not created. It has an eternity of the past, and there's an eternity of future, and an eternity everything that can happen will happen. I don't think that's really the significant aspect of Nietzsche's thought on the eternal recurrence. That's what it means in one sense, right? That everything will recapitulate exactly as it has been. But I don't think that's really what Nietzsche is really concerned with. I think, as suggested here, that it's really more a thought experiment. It is a moral thought experiment. Another way he puts it, and you can think about it yourself, can you live your life in such a way? Have you lived your life in such a way that upon facing death, you can say in full honesty, was that life? Well then, once more. I think that that's the center of the notion of the eternal recurrence as a moral challenge. And it's a moral challenge to the entire fundamental question that Nietzsche thinks we, as individuals in modern Western society, insofar as we're honest and reasonably intelligent, must confront. Under what conditions can our life have meaning when we give up all of the supernatural illusions which everything, all the institutions and traditions of our culture conspires to impose upon us? We've seen where they come from. I haven't dwelled. Nietzsche has some fantastic passages, especially in the Antichrist, about the whole development of Judaism and Judaism leading into Christianity, and how the followers of Jesus totally misunderstood Jesus's message, and how Paul used that to create original sin. All right, think of that doctrine, by the way, as being essential of religion. And what is what is the moral framework of a religion which celebrates at its core original sin? That means we're guilty before we're born. And by the way, I mean, Augustine drew that conclusion, by the way. Do children, babies who are not baptized, do they go to hell knowing what Christian hell is? And Augustine said, yes. I mean, all right, think of that. All right. Fascinating to think about. A little sad if you think about it. All right. All right. But if we can free ourselves, we free spirits, as Nietzsche says. All right. Those who have the ears with which to hear me, he says. They may not yet have been born. He writes that way. I am writing for those who have the ears with which to hear me. Those may not even have been born yet. But those who can hear me, we free spirits, right? Freed from the oppressive, self-denying religion of the supernatural, all forms, right? Can we then find a way to make sense of our life in such a way that we celebrate it? We make it meaningful. And what's the ultimate test? Can we live in such a way that we can confront death and say, was that life? Well then, once more. So I think that the doctrine of eternal recurrence is central to Nietzsche's thought. And if you have taken a course on Nietzsche or you read, and you have to know, yes, he celebrated eternal recurrence, but I think what he meant, the central meaning and significance of it is precisely that. The challenge to each of us, we free spirits, to make our life meaningful on its own terms without having to appeal to a transcendent which doesn't exist. And that is part of what it means to be on the way to the overman. Not as some kind of physical, fantastic, violent spectacle, not as a Superman. I mean, that's Shaw picks up the notion, and there are quasi-fascistic dimensions of George Bernard Shaw, especially when he gets into this Superman stuff. But then give him allowances. George Bernard Shaw understood and encountered Nietzsche in the first half of the 20th century, when the popular understanding was under the control of the Nazi interpretation by and large. So, and we could say more about that, but we won't. So you have a sense of what the overman means. And as I said, an example that Nietzsche gives of one who has gone about as far in that direction as current situation allows, his example was Goethe, right? So you can understand that, you can see what the meaning of it. Can one counter, Nietzsche says, the spirit of gravity which pulls us down, and learn how to dance? Another way in which he gives expression to his sense of human capacity, right? Not to be pulled down by the force of gravity, depressed, but to learn how to dance, to express the body. The guide one can take for this, for the celebratory morality, clearly would be the heroes of Greek society. But Nietzsche understands that there has been a benefit that Christianity has brought, which they don't have, so that the overman, as it were, the future improvement, obviously would be the celebratory of the natural conditions as embodied by, let us say, Achilles, but with the development of the spirituality, which is the result of the interiorization that Christianity brings in the self, right? So the critique of Christianity, which is a critique in large sense, for example, of St. Paul and of St. Augustine and many others, in which the life drive, as it were, what is often called in Nietzschean terms the will to power, not power over others. It's the the affirmation of life. It's actually will to power is really a bad translation because, as they point out, the word in Greek, vilitomat, is dative case, and the dative case means possessive, and it's really the power of the will. It's the potency of the drive for life. It's more like the Spinozistic sense of the life affirmation. Right, life affirmation. The life affirmation was simplistic in the ancient Greeks. So the characters like Achilles are psychologically simplistic. The Christians, with this self-denial, have led to a tremendous interiorization of life affirmation, which has, in the Christians, fueled guilt, sin, self-renunciation, and desire for transcendence. But that has developed a sophistication of the psychological sophistication, and so that the overman, the improvement, would be a psychologically sophisticated post-Christian Achilles, if you can see the process there, because Christianity has brought this kind of increased psychological depth, which Nietzsche embodies in his analysis, and Freud does also, and much of Western civilization has developed a psychological sophistication and development of the interior consciousness and self-consciousness. Right? So it's so that the values that are being celebrated by Nietzsche, right, are connected to the ancient Greek heroes, but with the psychological sophistication that is the result of the Christian interiorization. Right? I hope that is somewhat clear. That's why Goethe is a better embodiment, not of the goal, but of a human being who has, in some sense, taken human development as far as has yet been possible, not yet as we free spirits. So you have then some of the key doctrines of Nietzsche. I hope they're coming through in this discussion. Clearly, is the overman. The overman shall be the meaning of the earth, if life is to be meaningful on its own terms. Okay? The eternal recurrence, not so much as a putative scientific doctrine, though Nietzsche may or may not have believed it. Some people have. I don't think it's really significant in his thought, but as a moral test, I think it is not only significant for him. I think that's central. I think it's quite important for us to think about. So the doctrine of eternal recurrence, which means really an affirmation of remaining faithful to the earth. Another doctrine there is amor fati. He refers to that, amorfati, which is in some sense simply love of fate. But it means the affirmation of one's life as it is and as it is lived, without regret, without resentment, without ressentiment, but with affirmation. Perhaps there should be more of a subtle moral critique involved in that. Albert Camus, who was very much influenced by Nietzsche, very much impressed by his analysis of Western civilization and culture, distanced himself from that amor fati, say, in the context of 20th century experience. One cannot simply celebrate the world as it has developed, given, for example, the concentration camps, given the development of totalitarianism, right? There needs to be a moral critique of aspects of what has taken place. Nietzsche does not give you a framework for that kind of moral critique, because his major concern really is the critique of a whole worldview and a culture which is based on the supernatural. And that means the denial of the autonomy of the natural. And he is trying to remain faithful to the earth. Right? So we have eternal recurrence. We have the overman. Right? We have amor fati, the notion of a sense of acceptance of the earth, right? as it is, as central dimensions. And all of this is sustained by this doctrine of the will to power. Right? Nietzsche had thought that he would write a book about the will to power, but in the very last years of his life, he actually gave that up. He gave that up for a proposed 4-volume work on the revaluation of all values. I'm going to come back to that as the conclusion here, though we've really said a lot about it already. But I want to clarify the notion then of the will to power, because it is so central to Nietzsche's thought, even if not in the form in which it ultimately finds public expression in the volume produced by his sister basically after his death, but certainly after his going insane, really, physically being destroyed. And so I think the notion, what's need to be seen here is in the question of the will to power. It's not power over others that is at stake. It is, you might say, potency. It is the vitality of human living. And from Nietzsche's point of view, all beings, certainly all live beings, right, express this effort at sustaining and transcending themselves, pushing themselves on. So this may or may not be an adequate theory, but it's a theoretic framework within which he thinks that life is, he says, will to power, but life is affirmation. It is self-transcending. It is continually pushing to expand its activity and do it is vital life, right? So that is you might say a kind of vitalism of some sort, right? It's not a spiritualism. He thinks this is all a natural process. This is what it means for physiologically living animals, and it's true for animals as well as for the human animal. And we are animals, right? He talks of deifying nature, getting rid of the gods. Those are all fabrications. So we are body. We are natural. Right? And as natural beings, right, we have the natural drives. Right? Now, different individuals have different kinds of character, different kinds of drives. Not everybody is identical, but all share those conditions, the conditions under which life thrives. Well, right? So the will to power means the desire, the drive, especially the drive of, not the desire so much as the drive of life to thrive. And he thinks that's pervasive in the animal kingdom. And it's true in humans also. Right? Now, the key question becomes, under what conditions do you or I thrive? Under what conditions does the culture of civilization thrive? Right? So but he sees that at work in all. So even when he does the analysis of the slave morality and the master morality, we take these not as self-contained entire types, but as tendencies with perhaps in different cultures and in different individuals to different degrees, right? To the extent to which we see that these are both expressions of the conditions under which the individual thrives. Right? Now, the problem is that those who are incapable of thriving in self-affirmation, right? That's the master morality, right? Create conditions under which they thrive, right? They thrive, right, through ressentiment, right, by promoting the values which speak to their needs, right, and which denigrate the others. So the will to power, which we call it the conditions under which life thrives, right, is universal from Nietzsche's point of view. And one looks then to see what are the conditions, to see what are the values that are being expressed by an individual or a culture, because you are then seeing the conditions under which that kind of person thrives. Right? So there is a kind of systematized universality in Nietzsche's conception of the world. Interesting to think about, because there's seems to me some empirical truth to that. What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean for humans to be alive? It means to act, do, think, engage. The question is, how does one think, act, do, and engage? And what does one feel capable of doing? And what does one not feel capable of doing? So the will to power is the theoretical framework within which Nietzsche operates. Right? It gives rise to his diagnosis of slave morality and master morality, his diagnosis of Western philosophers, his diagnosis of major religions, and his diagnosis of Western civilization. All right. Let me stop for a moment and see if people have any comments or questions. Sort of, I tried to give a kind of overlay of Nietzsche's thought as a systematic psychocultural critique of Western civilization at the late 19th century. As a prophet, in some sense, that's the way he saw himself. Any thoughts or questions or comments that people would like to raise?
Yeah, David?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, Ben.
The overman status that you described in some detail in the early going of your remarks seem to be confined to a portion of the population. Nietzsche was not egalitarian or democratic, and yet I wonder how that status of being overman is conferred. Is it impossible to aspire to that situation? And it's sounding as though in the latter going, this is a universal possibility. So I'm having difficulty understanding whether he thinks that it's something that's only available to a segment of the population, or something that is basic to life and therefore possible for everyone.
Yeah, I think the answer is that it's available to everybody, but he does not think that most people have the strength of character to be creators of the meaning of their own lives. I mean, he just thinks that's an empirical fact, right? I mean, so he's certainly, you might say he's an aristocrat of some sort in that sense. He thinks that people are not equal in their capacities. It's not a political issue. There's nothing, again, there's no politics in Nietzsche. I mean, never, except for his uh, despising of nationalism, he really has no politics per se. So it's a question of under what conditions can an individual thrive, and who have the and what individuals have the capacity to undertake the activity, assume responsibility for the meaning of their own lives, and be creative. It's open to everybody. But he thinks by the vast majority of people, it's really asking too much of them, and that's okay. He's not seeking to suppress them or to punish them. And if you push him a little bit, and he said, civilization requires people to take out the garbage. All right, that's fine. They don't have to be overmen. All right, they will benefit. They will benefit from the excellence of the few. They will, in terms of being able to enjoy it. You could think of it now as saying they could go to the theater and see great actors or something. The people are really capable of doing great things, but most of the people can't do that. All right. So I think that's the way I would answer that question. He doesn't believe people are basically equal. He thinks there's various differences in quality and character and capacities. So it's open to all, but it's like it can only be taken on by few. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Arlene, unmute yourself.
Would you say that everybody has a different emotional and physical condition to be able to thrive? Everybody's is different, is my point. What I may take to survive emotionally and physically, you might not. Did he take that into account?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, I think the Nietzsche believes people are very different in their character and in the conditions under which they thrive. He thinks relatively few would have the capacity to be like, let me use the example, Goethe, using the example that he does refer to as a model individual as of his time. But everybody is quite unique and different in that kind of way. Yes, that's absolutely true from his point of view. Yes, that's empirically the case. And that's fine. I mean, it's not a question of making people suffer if they're not capable of assuming great responsibilities and being remarkably creative or in different areas of fields. The point that's crucial to see is that it's the character that you have, or that each of us has, is that which undergirds our sense of what is the best way to live one's life, which gives rise to the way we understand the world. So if you think of those three things, the causal dynamic, you might say, or the operative force is our character. And that then determines the conditions under which we thrive. And the conditions under which we thrive determines the way we understand the nature of the world. So if you're doing philosophical analysis, if you're a philosopher and you're looking at other philosophers, you reverse it the other way. You start with the philosophy, but you say, wait a second, what must be the moral, the kind of lifestyle which this philosophy sustains, and what must be the character of the individual to celebrate this lifestyle? And all right.
I got it.
It becomes.
We each have to figure out what our lifestyle condition is to thrive to our ultimate.
Right. Absolutely. And we can all be, you might say, free spirits in that sense that Nietzsche says, in the sense that we can take responsibility for that with the understanding of our own possibilities and limitations, and at the same time take the final test, as it were. When we confront life, was that life? Well, then,
what
we lived it in such a way that we can affirm it again.
What comes to my mind? Frank Sinatra's song, "That's Life."
Yeah. Okay. Other comment or question or observation? Yes, Phil?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've got we all know that Nietzsche lived at a time of tremendous dynamism and new ideas. You mentioned Darwin, but he also was a contemporary with Marx, with Auguste Lecomte, the great almost founder, I guess some say, of sociology. And Comte, I always, when I thought of him, I'm reminded of his distinction between the culture and the life and the atmosphere of what he called a wine shop, I guess we call it a tavern or a saloon, and a bank or an administrative office, and the ways in which people express their energy, their vitality, their power, I guess, as you described Nietzsche is saying, and how that contrasted based on the sociological circumstance or social circumstances in which these sentiments are expressed. Does Nietzsche speak to some of those kinds of other conceptualizers of reality like Marx or Lecomte, Auguste Lecomte?
I don't know that he addresses either Marx or Comte. The people that really influenced him the most, that he really, dealt with and was deeply influenced by, or Arthur Schopenhauer, Immanuel Kant. Certainly one could not be in the German or even any philosopher of the 19th century without having dealing with Kant. And very critical of Kant, I mean, in a sense, as this continuity of of Christianity for the Platonism as Christianity for the populace, for masses. Schopenhauer, particularly, some of the other, he's very much responding to and critically responding to those German artistic critics, for example, and experts on Greek civilization and culture. So the classic example being Winkelmann, who presents the Greeks as if they are these noble, rational beings who are defined by the formal, brilliant structure of Greek architecture, such as the Parthenon. And that's what Nietzsche calls the Apollonian dimension. But his critique of Greek culture was to argue that in his brilliant opening book, The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music, that the Apollonian, and in fact, the Greek tragedy itself was essentially a Apollonian dream of a Dionysian chorus. And the Dionysian is this life force, which he thinks the experts of the 19th century German science of the time totally missed, that there was both a physical and sensual vitality in Greek culture, which was a way of responding to a fundamentally tragic vision of the human condition. And that the Greek tragedies are ways in which they were religious festivals, they were part of religious festivals, and they are ways in which the Greek culture sought to assuage and come to terms with the tragic vision of their condition, and that the Apollonian sense of rationality was a kind of idealized dream to cover over a tragic reality. All right, I'm oversimplifying, but that's a kind of sense that this was his opening, his first book that he wrote, which was not well received at all by his profession, which was philology. That's what he was, a professor of philology originally, and because it challenged the entire structure of the traditional understanding at that time of Greek civilization and culture, as expressed, for example, in the Parthenon. Use that as an example. So there's a sense in which Nietzsche sees an underside from the very beginning. And I think that Schopenhauer is a contribution to that. Nietzsche was also very much involved with the music and with the personality and culture of Wagner. And he, in fact, The Birth of Tragedy is the book is The Birth of Tragedy Out of the Spirit of Music. And the end of that book is a celebration of Wagner as the rebirth of German culture and civilization. But soon, not too soon thereafter, he soured on Wagner as a Christianized and anti-Semitic nationalist. And some of the last books he wrote are Nietzsche contra Wagner. But he was very close to Wagner as a person, personally, and to Wagner's wife, who was Liszt's daughter, Cosimo. And him, by the way, Nietzsche himself was a composer and an excellent musician, a pianist. He played the piano quite well and composed music. Nothing that I think people play these days, but he excelled in philosophy, not in musical composition. But he was very much enamored of music and very knowledgeable critique of music, and initially a celebrant of Wagner's music and Wagner and the culture which he thought Wagner was bringing forth, and got totally soured on that. So those would be more of the influences that Nietzsche experienced. I don't know of anything about that. I don't know if he even read Kant or knew anything about Kant. He was quite knowledgeable about the history of Western philosophy, and certainly about the philology and about Greek and ancient Greek culture and civilization. He was an expert in that. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, well, I think we'll just leave it there. We're just about toward the end. I won't add anything more. I hope this was somewhat illuminating, and I appreciate very much all of you being there. And in a couple of months, I'm going to do a very different kind of character in Spinoza. I'll do to talk about Spinoza, who was let me just say about Spinoza, just as one little remark. Bertrand Russell has a history of Western philosophy, and he's often very sarcastic about people, often very critical, and usually very, and of course, brilliantly written. But he begins the section on Spinoza. It always struck me. He said, Spinoza may not have been the most brilliant philosopher in Western civilization, but ethically he was supreme. I always thought that was a remarkable comment from Bertrand Russell. So we'll see what we can make of that next time.
Oh, and I also wanted to mention, it's Karen, that Spinoza is going to be in person, just for those folks who aren't here on the island. That is an in-person class. So
yes, not Spinoza won't be in person, but I will.
Professor Sprintzen will be in person.
David, thank you so much. I'll see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.